Who are the top 5 New York Giants defensive players that the team just can't do without in 2023? I'm going to give you my list coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina. It is Hump Day, Wednesday. We are midway through the week, and another full week for us at the Locked On Giants podcast, as well as over at the Giants, who are currently in the midst of their OTAs. So on today's show, we are going to take a look at the top 5 defensive players on the New York Giants that this team just really can't do without in 2023. So I put together a list. I ordered it. This was a little tougher than the list I put together for the offense because I wasn't quite sure how to order it, but I came up with a list, and we'll see what you guys and gals think about it. And then, of course, later this week, tomorrow, specifically, the Giants OTAs open to the media, so I'll be there. I'll have a report for you, a firsthand report, and then we'll just cruise right into the Memorial Day weekend. So lots to get through the rest of this week. Thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. It is appreciated. So let us get into it. All right, so this is a list of the top 5 defensive players on the Giants that they really cannot afford to be without. These are guys that I think are just going to mean so much to the defense. Now, before I give you the players on this list, the reason why this was so difficult was because in a lot of instances, there was a question to me as to whether I should go with pairs or individuals. And I had to kind of weigh the two scenarios, if you will. So ultimately, I decided to go with individuals, even though in some cases, like spoiler alert, cornerback, it's like, okay, should I go with both or should I go with one guy in particular? So ultimately, I decided to go with one over the other. And I'll explain why I did that as we go along. So I just wanted to put that out there for you before getting into the list. All right. So that said, here's the list. Let's get to it. Number 5 on my list of top 5 Giants defenders that this team cannot do without this season. Linebacker Bobby Okereke. Now, Bobby Okereke, of course, is a newcomer to the team, and you're probably saying, well, we don't know exactly what he's going to do in this defense. We know what he did with the Colts. Is he going to be as good? Because look, there's been instances where the Giants have signed guys from other teams and they've come over and they just haven't worked out for the Giants. Most recently, Kenny Golladay, good example. If you want to go on defense, a few years ago, Connor Barwin was another guy that they signed, and there was a lot of hope and optimism about him, and he didn't work out for them. So why do I think Bobby Okereke needs to be on this list? Well, good question. And I'm going to tell you. Bobby Okereke is going to be an every down linebacker for this team. He will probably get the green dot, and I will see if I can find out for sure. I know a lot of you have already asked me, those of you who are on the new Locked On Giants text subscription service that we're offering, details of which are in the show notes, by the way. A lot of you have already asked me if Okereke is going to get the green dot, or is it going to be McKinney or somebody else this year? So I will see what I could find out. I don't know if they've set that up or made that determination just yet, but I'll see what I could find out. I know at some point we're going to get the coordinators, I think during the mini camp next month in June, but I'll see what I can find out for you. Anyway, so I believe Bobby Okereke is going to be an every down linebacker for them. I do think, if I had to take a guess, I think he'll get the green dot. I think it makes more sense to give the linebacker the green dot as opposed to McKinney, who had it last year until the hand injury. Why do I feel Okereke is also so important? Because what's behind him right now? A lot of unproven guys, right? So behind Bobby Okereke You have Darian Beavers, who should be back, who was looking good, by the way, until he tore his ACL. But we didn't really see, I think, a complete picture from him because his season was cut short. Gerard Davis is back there. And Davis, a guy that the Giants wanted badly last year, he was on the Detroit Lions practice squad. The Giants wanted him. And it took a few weeks of coaxing before they finally brought him over. Gerard Davis struggled a little bit, mainly because he was thrown into the mix early and really didn't have a chance to totally absorb the defensive playbook. So I kind of chalk that up to his struggles. We'll see if he's going to be any better this year, now that he's having a whole offseason to really learn the playbook. Micah McFadden is in the mix, Carter Coughlin, Cam Brown. These are all guys that, really didn't make any kind of dent last year, despite the fact that the inside linebackers were struggling. So in my opinion, Bobby Okereke is probably the most accomplished of this group based on what we know right now. And the one guy that if he goes down, what are they going to do at the position? So Bobby Okereke, linebacker, number 5 on my list of the top 5 Giants defenders this team cannot be without in 2023. Number 4 is, drumroll please, safety, Xavier McKinney. Now, this is interesting because the one drawback with McKinney, and it's really, I don't know that you could say that it's his fault because injuries happen. And yes, I know about the injury last year and how that happened during the bye week, but McKinney hasn't played in full seasons every year he's been in the league. The first year, his rookie season, he had the broken foot that he suffered late in training camp, came back later in the year, showed flashes of being a good, a solid player. Then he really showed flashes in his second year. And then last year he was on his way to showing more flashes. And then he had that broken hand that he suffered in the ATV accident during the bye week. So what is it about McKinney that makes him so valuable that he makes this list? Well, he can play just about all over the field, all right? Whether you line him up at free safety, down in the box, which really isn't his best position. You can play him in the slot if you need to. Again, really not his best position, but he can play down there. He could be a pseudo linebacker. You could put him all over the place. You could blitz him. So much you could do with Xavier McKinney. And when you have a guy that can do so many things for you on defense, you don't want to be without that guy. That guy is gold, so to speak. So, the thing with McKinney, besides staying healthy, is I'd like to see him make a few more impact plays moving forward. So I pulled some numbers from his first 3 seasons in the league. From 2022, he had 5 pass breakups, no interceptions. 2021, he had 10 pass breakups, 5 interceptions. And remember, that was a full season for him. Whereas 2022 and 2020 were injury shortened. And in 2020, 1 pass breakup, 1 interception. So, you'd like to see him stay healthy and you'd like to see him make more impact plays. Now, the other number that I pulled that I was curious about was what was the opponent's average passing yardage with McKinney in the lineup and without him in the lineup. So having pulled that, with McKinney in the lineup, the average passing yardage against the Giants was 208.3. Without him, that rose to 220.8. It's not that big of a jump, but it's significant nonetheless. And, before I move on to the next point there, I realized that in some cases opponents, maybe pass more, or maybe the passing game was going in was the key or the central part of the game plan. And that, sometimes these numbers, might be misconstrued or whatnot. But the way I see it, regardless if the passing game was the central focus of the opponent's offense, or if they had to, the fact of the matter is with McKinney in the lineup, they didn't have as much luck yardage wise as they did without him in the lineup. So I think McKinney, who is entering the final year of his rookie deal, got to have a big year this year. Got to stay healthy. It would be nice if he made some impact plays. But look, as I said before, already this guy, you can line him up just about anywhere on defense, and he's going to give you his all. And that right there makes him invaluable to defensive coordinator Wink Martindale. All right, who do I have for number 3 and number 2? Stick around. I'll tell you after this. Hey, Giant fans, with the NBA playoffs currently ongoing, there's no better time than right now to make a fast break to FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if their first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. Get in on all the action of the sports world with great promotions, a safe and secure app to set your bets, and instant payments. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. It is hump day. We are counting down my list of the top 5 Giants defensive players that this team absolutely cannot be without. And in case you missed it, on Monday, I had my list of the top 5 offensive players that this team cannot be without in 2023. Kind of a surprise, I think, more so in the order of the list as opposed to the guys that were on that list. But if you'd missed that episode, check it out. And speaking of episodes, the Giants have OTA number 3 tomorrow. So my plan is to get a podcast taped as soon as I can. You know, we should be finished pretty early. I think by early afternoon, I think we'll be done. So as soon as I take care of my writing, I'll tape a podcast with some observations, some thoughts, takeaways, and all that good stuff for you. I will also be tweeting, texting, posting on Instagram, video clips and whatnot. And for the subscribers to the Locked On Giants text campaign, which we are currently running, free 14-day trial. If you want to check it out, the details of which are in the show notes. I'll have some exclusives just for you. And remember, you can always text me back on that service. This way I will see the texts and I'll be able to answer them. They won't get lost in my mentions, which happens, unfortunately, all too often, especially when, the Giants they've got a practice or something. I get bombarded with a lot of, mentions and as try as I might to keep up with them all, sometimes I just can't. So it's just something to keep in mind. And again, details of that program are in the show notes. We're running a special 14-day trial, free. Cancel if you don't like it. And if you like it and you use the promo code that is in the show notes, which is PTRAIN, you get your first 2 months for the price of one, which is $4.99 per month. So it comes out to $2.50 per month after your 14-day trial ends. So do check that out and let me know what you think. So, all right, let's get back to the list of top 5 Giant defensive players that this team cannot be without in 2023. Now, I got to be honest with you, number 3 and number 2, I debated what order to put them in. And on my notebook here, I actually have them in a specific order. And now that I look at it, I think I'm going to flip it. I'm going to call an audible and I'm going to flip it. So that being said, player number 3, the third most important Giant that this team needs is, drumroll please, cornerback Adoree Jackson. All right, now, you guys have probably heard me say on past shows that Adoree Jackson, I don't think he's going to get his contract renewed or extended, I should say, since he's in the final year of his contract. I've spoken about how, there haven't been enough big plays made from him. But that being said, he is right now the best cover corner that they have on the team. Dante Banks, he's gonna be a good one for them, but let's see what he brings to the table and how, what kind of assignments he brings. But anyway, let's talk about Jackson. And I don't need to tell you how last year when Adoree Jackson was out of the lineup for the Giants, because he was dealing with that sprained MCL that he suffered on a punt return of all things. The Giants struggled at cornerback. And I've said many times, as I'm sure you guys know, that in order, for the pass rush to be effective, you need guys on the back end that can hold their coverage. And when Adoree went out of the lineup, didn't happen. Really didn't happen. So that said, looking at some stats here, when Adoree was in the lineup, opponents averaged 203 yards in the passing game. When he was out of the lineup, it was 238.7. Now, again, Jackson didn't have any interceptions. He only had 7 pass breakups. You can chalk that up to maybe the fact that he missed time, which, you don't know what he would have done had he played a full season. But you could also say, all right, well, he's only had 2 interceptions since joining the Giants and not a whole lot of big impact plays, but sometimes those big impact plays, while nice to have, how did he do against shutting down the opponent's number 1 receiver? That's where you have the value of an Adoree Jackson. And I'm going to give you, again, some additional stats here. In the games that Adoree played in last year, he allowed a 57.8% completion against. That was less than his career 60.1, which means that, opponents throwing at him, he only allowed 57.8 of those passes to be completed. Not bad. And he finished with an 85.9 NFL rating. Also not bad. So I think we can all agree that Adoree Jackson was the Giants' best cornerback last year. This year, pairing him up with Deonte Banks, I think is going to hopefully help him take his game to the next level. I mean, I would like to see Adoree Jackson have a fantastic year, statistically speaking. People always say to me, hey, why won't will the Giants do something with his contract? I don't think they will, but I think Adoree can change the narrative on that. I think with a strong season, a strong statistical performance, and, just continuing to play well against opponents, I think he can maybe change the team's perspective on what they do with him moving forward. So that is, unless, of course, the team feels that Cordell Flott or Nick McLeod or Aaron Robinson can ultimately replace him, which would not surprise me, by the way. I think that's probably what the future holds for the Giants, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So we'll stick with the present time. All right, number 2 on my list. And I originally had him again as number 3, but I moved him up. And I'll tell you why. Edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeaux is number 2 on my list. Now, why? Well, people go back and they look at his rookie campaign and they say he did not have, all things considered, being the 5th overall pick in the draft, he did not have the production that matched his draft pedigree. To that, ladies and gentlemen, I say the guy also had an injury that affected him, not just, at the start of the season, but well into the season. And once he ultimately got better physically, that's when you started to see the impact that Kayvon Thibodeaux can have on a game. And, it's interesting. People tend to look at sacks on defense. And yes, sacks are great to have. Ultimately, that's what you want. But Wink Martindale, when he assesses his pass rush, he's looking at more than sacks. He's looking at quarterback pressures, hits, hurries, scrambles that weren't planned, interceptions, strip sacks, whatever. He's taken all that into consideration because, false starts is another thing, holding penalties, all that gets factored in because the idea is to make life uncomfortable for the opposing quarterback. And if you're doing that on a consistent basis, again, Yes, it would be great to have sacks all the time, but sacks are not the be all end all. So what's interesting is, I mentioned interceptions. Well, that's up to the guys on the back end to deliver in that regard. And they didn't really do that as much as they could have. But that's why I always say the back end of the defense and the front end have to work together. And last year, you could say that wasn't always the case. But let me get back to Thibodeaux here and give you some stats. I mentioned once he overcame his injuries, his production really started to pick up. So 28 of his 49 total tackles came in the last 6 weeks of the season when he was healthy. 3 of his 4 sacks, all six of his tackles for losses. Again, all that coming in the last quarter of the season. 2 pass breakups out of 5 came in the last quarter. And here's the best thing about Thibodeaux. You look at the sacks he had, and I don't think you can classify them as cleanups. They were legitimate sacks, whereas, sometimes a guy will benefit from, a teammate forcing the quarterback into his arms. We've seen many of those. We call those cleanup sacks. I don't think you could say that Thibodeaux had a lot of cleanup sacks last year. So there were hints, there were signs that this guy was going to be something special. And I'll give you another stat from Pro Football Focus. He didn't have any missed tackles from week 14 on. He had 17 of his 29 run stops in that last quarter, and 13 of his 45 pressures were generated in those last few games. So the point being is once he got healthy, the game started to slow down. He started to get comfortable, and he started to be productive. And you sit here and you say to yourself, can he pick that up? Can he resume where he left off? And if he can, and he can build on that, look out, ladies and gentlemen, because now you're talking potentially a guy who, if he becomes a nuisance to opposing offenses, maybe he draws double teams. And maybe by drawing double teams, that opens things up for other guys on the defense. So that's a possibility. And there are other guys on the defense who can certainly get after the quarterback and make life a living, what for them. So Kayvon Thibodeaux, number 2 on my list. Now, who's number 1? You probably have guessed by now, but if not, I'll tell you right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, coming to you on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube your first watch of the day. And a shout out to all my everydayers, to my new people. If you are new to the podcast, drop me a line and let me know so I can give you a shout out. And of course, to those of you who check out the program regularly, thank you so much for everything. I mean, I'm just absolutely humbled. Every day I sit down to record a new podcast here, I'm absolutely humbled and grateful that you take time out of your day to listen or watch the podcast. So thank you. Thank you. Okay. We are talking the top five Giant defensive players, guys that if the team is without for any stretch of time, yikes. So we are up to number 1. But before I get to number 1, for those of you who maybe skipped ahead to this section because you didn't want to hear who I did from number 5 to number 2, to recap, number 5, I had Bobby Okereke, inside linebacker. Number 4 was safety Xavier McKinney. Number 3, cornerback Adoree Jackson. And number 2, edge Kayvon Thibodeaux. All right, who's number 1? You probably know the position. And I'm going to tell you, it's defensive line. Now, who on the defensive line? Yep, it's him. Dexter Lawrence, sexy Dexy. He is the number 1 guy on my list. All right, so going back to earlier in the program, I mentioned how I could have made a case for 2 guys at a position, who was to pick, in this case, Dexter Lawrence or Leonard Williams. It was a tough call. And then I said to myself, you know what? I'm just going to pick one and make a case for it. I'm not going to sit here and take the easy way out. So I picked Dexter for a couple reasons. And this is not meant to be a slam or a slight against Leonard Williams, who I think is still a very good player. And I think if I were doing a top 10 list, that he would definitely be in the top 5. But I look at it this way. Dexter Lawrence is still a player who is on the rise. He's been a durable player for this team. He has been a productive player. I mean, name me, how many guys play Dexter Lawrence's position who are an every down player. That's what Dexter has worked himself into. He has become an every down player. He can push the pocket, rush the passer, watch him chase after guys. It's like, wow, what am I watching here? It's that because he's just so mobile. He is on the rise. Now, Leonard, on the other hand, like I said, still a very good player, still a very productive player. My concern with Leonard is he has a lot of worn tread on his tires. The last couple of years, he's dealt with injuries that have affected him. And you can make the case that he hasn't really looked as, effective as he did a few years ago when he had his double-digit sack season. And that's to be expected. Sometimes, guys start to break down. Sometimes it's how they're being played. I mean, there's any number of reasons, but you would think that when Dexter was his stock was rising and Leonard was in the defense, that maybe teams would pay more attention to Dexter, which would free things up for Leonard. And I don't know that we saw enough of that last year. So that's why one of the reasons why I went with Dexter. Durable, a leader, a young guy. We talk about the salary cap a lot on this program. And, before Dexter signed his new contract, a lot of people were like, well, are they going to do something with Leonard's $32 million cap hit? And how are they going to be able to afford Leonard and Dexter? Folks, the more I think about this, the more I wonder if perhaps, with Leonard, they're just going to let him play out on the $32 million cap number and just call it a day after that. Because look, the $32 million cap number is not Leonard's fault. That's a result of multiple restructurings over the years. And it is what it is. And so if you're Joe Schoen, do you really want to push more money into the future on a guy who's pushing 30, whose production hasn't quite been, what it was, who has had injury issues the last couple of years? Is that really a good investment of your funds? And I don't know that you can make an argument that it can be. Now, of course, if Leonard comes in this year and he has a banner year, because technically it is a contract year for him, then you revisit the topic. But based on what we know as of today, kind of hard to make that justification. Dexter Lawrence, more productive, younger, just a guy who, like I said, he's on the rise. So to me, I felt he was worthy of being on this list, and a guy who we saw quite often last year when he came off the field. The run defense, which wasn't very good to begin with, no fault necessarily of Dexter or any one guy in particular. Well, all right, we'll say the linebackers, because they weren't really doing a good job filling their holes. But when Dexter came off the field, you noticed it. And not because, you didn't see him doing his sexy Dexy dance either. You noticed the drop off in the play. So I just feel that he is a key guy, especially in their quest to want to shut down the run. Now they did add, obviously, Ashawn Robinson. They added Joaquin Nunez-Roches to help with the run. They drafted this kid, Jordan Riley, who I think is raw. I think he's going to be more of a practice squad type of project. But Dexter's the guy, man. You don't have him on the field, good luck. So Dexter Lawrence takes the top spot on my list of the 5 Giants defensive players that this team really can't be without for any stretch of games or snaps for that matter in 2023. What did you think of my list? If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment. If you're listening on our audio platforms, drop me an email, All the contact information's in the show notes. So check it out. That's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. And don't forget, tomorrow, OTA number 3, the media does have access. I will be there. I will look to tape a program and get it out to you maybe a little bit early. I'll try and get it out early so that you can listen to it if you want to early, or if you want to wait until, the next day, you can. It's up to you. So do check that out. And again, thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast. Appreciate every one of you. We'll see you tomorrow, Giant fans.